Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. As we go to air tonight, a crunch meeting is underway over Ukraine's future, with Volodymyr Zelenskyy sitting down with both the country's European allies and negotiators from the United States in Berlin. This as reports emerge that Washington has offered Kyiv security guarantees equivalent to NATO's Article 5, a clause that says an attack on one is an attack on all. In just a moment, we'll go live to our correspondent Alex Cadier on this developing story. But first, the latest headlines. A new Czech government is sworn in with Andrej Babiš at the helm. Mass protests in Romania over allegations of corruption in the country's justice system. And Denmark looks to follow Australia in banning social media for young teenagers. But we begin tonight with a diplomatic rush over Ukraine as Volodymyr Zelenskyy meets with officials from Washington and Kyiv's European partners in a negotiations blitz to end Russia's war on his country. President Zelenskyy says that talks so far have been productive but not easy, that security guarantees tantamount to NATO's Article 5 are on the table, and that there is no agreement on giving up Ukrainian land. It comes as Europe's foreign ministers gathered in Brussels, and it's from the Belgian capital that our correspondent Alex Cadier joins me now. Good evening, Alex. So do we know yet if we're on the brink of a breakthrough on Ukraine?
Well, good evening, Aaron. I would perhaps stop short of describing this as a breakthrough, but it does seem that significant progress has been made in these talks. Very, very positive talks, as one U.S. official described them. We've heard similar positive noises from the Ukrainian side because it appears the U.S. is putting forward some fairly strong security guarantees for Ukraine. Article 5-like guarantees, according to President Zelenskyy, which would imply that any future attack from Russia after a peace deal is agreed on Ukraine may result in U.S. military involvement in the response. But although it seems security guarantees have been given, the details still thin on the ground. U.S. officials hailing that progress, saying that 90% of this deal is about ready to be discussed, be negotiated, but that some key issues, including territorial issues, are still to be discussed. That's a bit like saying, yes, we've built the house, it's 90% built, but we're missing the roof, because those territorial issues are fundamental and are a red line for the Ukrainian side, as President Zelenskyy said.
There has been enough dialogue on territorial issues, and it seems to me that for now we have different positions, to be honest. But I think my colleagues heard my personal position. I am very glad that I was able to convey this position personally.
So still the issue of territory, whether or not Ukraine would have to concede some of its land to Russia or in some kind of demilitarized zone. Details not clear. One top EU official I've been speaking to in the last few hours said that at the very least, the discussion over security guarantees is very serious. One thing they point to is the fact that the NATO Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, Alexis Grinkovich, was in the room and engaged in the detail. But Aaron, we have been on this diplomatic seesaw before. You have President Zelenskyy in the last few days saying Ukraine will give up its claim to joining NATO, that he will hold presidential elections as he's been pressured to do from the US. On that side, the European powers putting their weight behind President Zelenskyy, trying to tip the balance in the favor of a better deal for Ukraine. But we have seen in the past when Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner go to Moscow, there's always a possibility that seesaw goes back in the other direction. Progress, but no breakthrough, Aaron.
Now, while I have you, Alex, what about Russia's frozen assets? I mean, could Kyiv finally be in for that funding boost from Brussels?
Yes, no, maybe is really the answer from the European Union at the moment. I've been speaking again to top EU officials saying, yes, they think a deal will be reached. To remind you, it's using those Russian frozen assets to fund a reparations loan for Ukraine, which would be repaid if Russia pays reparations after the war to Ukraine. But of course, the main objection was from Belgium, which holds the majority of these assets at a clearinghouse here in Brussels. Other countries have now voiced concern as well. The Czech Republic, Italy, Bulgaria, all voicing concerns about this model of funding Ukraine over the next couple of years. Of course, crucial for the country to be able to fund its defences. Where do we stand on those negotiations within the EU? Kaja Kallas.
It is very hard. It's very difficult. Of course, today we also heard Belgium's worries, and I think everybody around the table understands Belgium's worries and is willing to share those burdens. I really, really do hope that we will achieve results Thursday, but right now, I mean, I'm optimistic by nature, but I'm also seeing how difficult it is. So I don't want to give any estimates. I'm saying that the work is ongoing.
So the wranglings will continue in Brussels. We know the EU ambassadors are still around the table continuing to negotiate. They are scheduled to do so until midnight later this evening, but of course that may go on for longer. Crucially, their bosses, the EU leaders, heads of state and government, including Prime Minister Donald Tusk of Poland, will be here Thursday, Friday to try and hash out a deal. One possible solution would be member states, individual member states, taking part of the liability if this loan would go wrong. Belgium does not want to shoulder the liability alone. They need guarantees from other member states. They're around the table. They're negotiating. No deal on the reparations loan. We've heard from Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, from Kaja Kallas, the top EU diplomat, that this is the only viable way of funding Ukraine. For now, they negotiate, Aaron.
Much to keep an eye on. Alex Cartier in Brussels, thank you. And over in Ukraine, Russia's onslaught of homes and power stations is ramping up, with President Zelenskyy accusing the Kremlin of using the strikes as leverage in negotiations. But despite the relentless attacks, Ukrainians themselves remain steadfast, many of them willing to endure a longer war and rallying against any territorial concessions. Our defence correspondent Susanna Jurek reports.
While the talks in Berlin got underway on Sunday and Monday over the peace proposal to end the war in Ukraine, Russia continued ravaging the country's residential areas and critical infrastructure. In the Black Sea port town of Odessa, residents are now forced to go without electricity for a record-breaking 22 hours a day, while other commodities, including water, are now being delivered by emergency services, following mass missile and drone attacks over the weekend.
Last night was very scary. We didn't sleep at all. It was hard to calm the children down. We woke up in the morning and there was nothing. No power, no internet, no water, and no heat either. It hasn't been like this in a long time, by the way. Like yesterday and like last night when I couldn't sleep and spent the whole night with the cats in the bathroom. Well, it was very scary. Probably the first time in the entire war I've been so scared.
As these ruthless attacks continue, with pressure from Washington mounting on Kiev, Zelenskyy floated that Ukraine is willing to compromise.
From the very beginning, Ukraine's desire was to join NATO. These are real security guarantees. Some partners from the US and Europe did not support this direction. Today, bilateral security guarantees between Ukraine and the US, Article 5-like guarantees for us from the US, and security guarantees from European colleagues, as well as other countries, Canada, Japan, are an opportunity to prevent another Russian invasion.
But while the president appears willing to rely on allies and partners for Ukraine's post-war stability, Ukrainians themselves are skeptical of these peace plans, which could undermine sovereignty in lieu of security.
If we join NATO, that will be a guarantee of security. Even if other countries support this and promise that everything will be documented, we all understand that it will lead to nothing. If Russia attacks again in the same way, no one will be able to offer any real resistance. Honestly, the situation is so ambiguous right now. For example, what is stopping Russia from provoking and starting hostilities, even if we give up our territories? As Otto von Bismarck said at the end of the 19th century, any agreement signed with Moscow is not worth the paper it is signed on.
According to the latest opinion polls published on Monday, 63% of Ukrainians are ready to endure the war as long as necessary. At the same time, over 70% of the population is not in favor of proposals which would include troop limitations or troop withdrawals from the Donbas region. Additionally, trust in the main negotiating party, the U.S., dropped by 20% since Trump's administration returned to the White House. This skepticism, and therefore doubts over the longevity of external security guarantees, is not unfounded, as previous instances of Kiev making concessions have been recognized as failures.
Nothing at all is guaranteed, just like the Budapest Memorandum guaranteed nothing. Here, it's simply deception, total deception, that's all.
In 1994, Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear stockpiles in exchange for Russia's acknowledgement of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial demarcations, mediated and guaranteed by Washington. Since 2014, the Minsk agreements were meant to stop Russia's war in Donetsk and Luhansk with international oversight. And for their part, experts noted that accepting Russia's ultimate goal discriminates against Kiev's security concessions.
The Kremlin has refused a ceasefire unless it effectively gets Ukraine's surrender. That's a surrender of territory. That's a surrender of sovereignty over its military with strict limits on troop levels and Western aid.
Even though the pressure on Kiev from Moscow and America in Berlin remains high, Kiev still has an ace up its sleeve. Reportedly, it delivered another substantial blow to Russia's naval capabilities, targeting a Kilo-class submarine. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
And we'll break all of this down with leading security analyst Ivana Stradna later in World News Tonight. Prague officially has a new sheriff and government in town. The Czech Republic's ruling coalition has been sworn in 2 months after the ANO party, headed by Andrej Babiš, won October's parliamentary election. Babiš, who's been appointed the country's Prime Minister for a second time, will govern alongside the far-right SPD and the Eurosceptic Motorists Party. But will he be a pragmatic leader or driven by his partners in government? Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney reports.
It's out of the old, in with the familiar, as ministers in Andrej Babiš's ANO party took office. Alena Skilerova, the finance minister in Babiš's previous cabinet, returns to her old post, as does Adam Wojtek at the health ministry, which he led during much of the COVID-19 pandemic. Lubomir Metnar is also back, this time at the Interior Ministry. The ANO party came first in October's parliamentary elections, promising to cut living costs like electricity bills, freeze taxes and increase pensions.
That program of Babiš's government recently published is kind of like, we're going to give money to everyone. We're going to reduce the prices of electricity. We were going to cancel the extension of the years when people leave for their old age retirement and everything. Basically, we will throw money everywhere. Where are they going to get it?
The cost of living dominated the elections. Over 5 years, the cost of living rose by almost 40% in the Czech Republic, whereas real wage earnings only rose by just under 5%. The war in Ukraine also featured prominently. The Czech Republic hosts 600,000 Ukrainians, the highest per capita rate in the EU, which has affected housing costs. Babiš campaigned on ending Czech aid for Ukraine, and he opposes using frozen Russian assets as financial aid for Kiev as well.
We agreed with the Belgian Prime Minister that the European Commission must find other ways to finance Ukraine. Our coffers are empty, and we need every crown we have for our citizens.
The far-right Freedom and Direct Democracy Party, led by Speaker Tommy Okamura, now also controls the Defence Ministry under former General Jaromír Zuna. Okamura wants closer ties to Russia. He also wants stringent new anti-asylum laws targeted particularly at Ukrainians.
Even in Poland, they've had enough of Ukrainians. We want to grant asylum in the Czech Republic only in exceptional cases. President Karol Nawrocki, along with the opposition party Law and Justice, accused refugees of queue-jumping for social benefits. In the new government, we will pass a new law on migration and asylum. We will not tolerate criminal activity by foreigners.
The motorist Petr Matsinka will head the Foreign Ministry and temporarily head the Environment portfolio. He wants to block the EU's Green Deal. Filip Turek, the nominee for the Environment Ministry, who has been accused of pro-Nazi sentiment, has still not been approved by President Petr Pavel. For TVP World in Prague, Andrew Sweeney.
Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets in Romania in a show of support for judges and prosecutors denouncing systemic abuse in the country's justice system. The demonstrations follow in the wake of a documentary released last week alleging the use of legal loopholes and unethical practices. John Todd has more.
A drumbeat for justice as around 10,000 Romanians marched through Bucharest for a fifth night in succession, calling for judicial reform.
We're protesting for a fair judiciary, for a judiciary for all. But this is just preparation for everything we need to do to have a rule of law. Right now, we had a patronage democracy. In many aspects, our state doesn't function. Now we demand justice.
A documentary last week by independent media outlet Recorder alleged that chief judges, who are politically backed, use legal loopholes for unethical practices, including questionable acquittals. It sparked demonstrations across the country. The report claimed that judges and prosecutors who complain often face disciplinary action.
We want an independent judiciary. We want to support honest magistrates. We want those who approved the justice laws from 2022 to leave.
We're unhappy with corruption, with the fact that there are no laws to protect us. We pay very high taxes. Nothing happens with the money that we pay. There's a feeling of discontent. People don't find justice in the courts. It doesn't work. That's the main idea. The thieves keep what they've stolen.
Around 700 Romanian judges and prosecutors have signed an open letter complaining about systematic dysfunction throughout the justice system. The public outcry comes just days after anti-government and anti-corruption protests in neighbouring Bulgaria brought down the government, with the Bulgarian Prime Minister announcing his team's resignation on Thursday. In Romania, President Nicolae Dan announced he would hold consultations with members of the judiciary next week, describing problems with the integrity of the judicial system as very serious. Whether this will be enough to satisfy the demonstrators remains to be seen.
What do Australia and Denmark have in common? Well, as a world-first social media ban for young teens comes into effect down under, Copenhagen wants to follow suit. In fact, the Danish government is now pushing a minimum age requirement of 15 years old for certain platforms. Sonia Gata-Bischan explains.
Denmark could be introducing a social media ban for under 15s as soon as mid-2026. The move is rooted in desire to better protect minors online.
We're standing in a situation in Denmark where far too many young people, far too many children are having a profile on a big social media platform.
Danish authorities estimate that approximately 98% of Danish children under 13 have at least one social media profile. The country's digital affairs minister said Denmark must move from digital captivity to community, but some experts have doubts if this is the way to go about it.
We have known for 20 years that big platforms prey on children's attention. We should have been much earlier in providing good rules, and it's not a good idea to now force children to suffer violations of their communicative rights just because we didn't have the energy and political ability to provide good rules earlier.
In imposing the regulation, Denmark would follow suit of Australia, where social media ban for under 16s came into effect on December 10th.
Make no mistake, this reform will change lives for Australian kids and allowing them to just have their childhood.
And while some agree,
I personally think it'll bring closer friends together easier, because rather than talking about things that are happening online, things that are actually happening in their lives.
Others have less faith in the significance of the new measure.
Kind of like pointless. Like, it's just like we're just going to create like new ways to get on these platforms.
A Danish MEP expressed enthusiasm about Australia's ban, indicating that it will serve as guidance for Europe.
I'm happy that they also have the same analysis as I have, that we need to protect kids better for what is taking place online. So I'm happy that they have made this ban, so that they are going to check it out, they're going to experiment with the law, and we will be able to learn from the Australian law.
And while in pursuit of children's safety, some put their faith in the social media ban, others indicate the measure can prove even counterproductive in ensuring lasting protection.
When they're 16, they will no longer have any problems with online use. I don't think that's a good idea. Children have to be taught very early on how to engage with online content and how to see dangerous things, what to do if they see them, and how not to fall into the trap of algorithmic recommender systems. Prohibitions are not a good approach.
But whether or not prohibitions are good, Denmark aside, a number of countries are looking to follow in Australia's footsteps, with Malaysia expected to introduce a similar ban early next year, and Norway exploring ways to limit social media access for youth too. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabišćan.
And joining me now is Ivana Stradna, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Good evening to you, ma'am.
Good evening.
I want to start with Friedrich Merz, who says, quote, perhaps for the first time since the outbreak of the full-scale war, reaching a ceasefire appears actually possible. US officials, of course, reporting that we're 90% of the way there. In your mind, are we on the brink of a breakthrough?
I think when it comes to Russia, we have to understand that it's not going to be easy to negotiate and to end this war anytime soon, because Putin is the one who wants to make sure to pause for a moment and to replenish his military and to continue. There are numerous calculations the Russian economy might actually collapse by the end of 2026. So what Putin is doing right now, he's trying just to buy more time and to put more pressure on Zelenskyy to accept absolutely unacceptable things and to portray Zelenskyy as an unreliable actor. So that's precisely, I'm very concerned, whoever believes in the West that negotiations are going in the right direction, the war will end anytime soon, I believe it's sorely mistaken.
Well, President Zelenskyy says the talks with the United States have been constructive but not easy. And of course, the key sticking point, that 10%, if you like, remains the withdrawal of troops from some parts of eastern Ukraine, for example, Donetsk. And we had our Europe correspondent, Alex Kadia, earlier saying that not having that as part of the percentage is like having a house built but no roof. I mean, would you agree with that assessment, that you can't really say you're 90% of the way there when land concessions, territorial concessions are still such a sticking point?
I think we have to zoom out when we understand this. Even if we allow such concessions, Putin is not going to stop there. The reason why Russia is pushing for that, it's because Moscow knows that Kyiv cannot accept something like that. And they likely portrayed such a deal to the Trump administration, believing if they just give up, the part of territory, that is going to bring Putin closer to the negotiation table. This is an old KGB game, and we should absolutely not fall for that. And that's precisely why I'm very, very concerned, here in Washington, D.C., hearing over and over again that concessions when it comes to territory, that they are going to bring more peace. Because, look, history is an indication. We already know what happened with numerous other agreements that Russia had with Ukraine, and it violated. So I don't understand why people believe that this time around Putin is going to change his behavior. And as a matter of fact, as I said, this is just an old game. You have to understand when you negotiate with the Kremlin that Putin doesn't think like the West. He understands very well that Washington, D.C., they love to talk business. They love to talk deals. And Trump loves to be portrayed as a deal maker. So, but to have a deal maker in the room, you also have to have the other side of negotiation table that is willing to negotiate in good faith. And all you really have to do is just to see exactly the pictures that you are showing right now. Every time when we offer negotiation to Putin, he actually sends us a signal by attacking more Ukraine. So I really don't understand what part of that message the West does not understand.
Well, you mentioned deals. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were the two US representatives in Berlin today, leading Washington's side. I mean, some argue that they are simply real estate developers in disguise when they're negotiating issues like land concessions. Is that, and you touched on it there, but is that a genuine concern that you've got two guys in charge for the United States who are looking at Donetsk, they're looking at Luhansk as property to be traded?
Culture matters. And when you negotiate, you have to understand how your opponent thinks. It doesn't matter how you think, how you perceive the world. It's important to understand how the opposing party sees. And that's, I think, one of the key problems with Washington, believing that everyone thinks like them, that everyone processes information like them, and they try to apply American way of thinking business deals to negotiations to end the war. But here is a caveat. They do not understand how Putin thinks, but Putin perfectly understands how they think. And that's precisely why Putin loves to send that envoy for economics, who constantly talks about, mutual economic developments, to talk about, let's forget about Ukraine, let's focus on business. Knowing that the Trump administration likes to talk in transactional terms. So this is an old KG, implement that. They tried to implement that in the past, and they're trying to push for something like that in the future. And until, whether here in Washington, D.C., whether in Brussels or any other place where people are negotiating with Russia, until negotiators understand how the Kremlin thinks, we are doomed to fail.
Now, we're running out of time, but we're also hearing reports tonight that America could give security guarantees to Ukraine that are in line with Article 5 of the NATO alliance, this clause that says an attack on one is an attack on all. Do you have any optimism around that kind of a security guarantee? What could that look like?
I think we have to be very careful when it comes to security guarantees, because make no mistake, Putin is going to challenge also that. Look, you're sitting in Poland. We already saw drone incursions in Poland. We already saw numerous sabotage activities there in the Baltic states, elsewhere in Western Europe, where Putin has been trying to show that Article 5 is a paper tiger. I would love to see security guarantees in Ukraine, but those security guarantees should not be those just, put like on a paper, and to be perceived as a paper tiger, they really, really have to bite. And to make sure that it's not only words, but when, not if, when Putin crosses the red line, that NATO will be willing and ready to respond. And I'm not sure about that.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because how can these security guarantees, if enacted, be trusted when even the rest of Europe, us in Poland, the NATO alliance, is itself doubting that Washington might not come and support the continent in the event of a Russia attack?
President Trump did something really good during the NATO conference several months ago, and he actually confirmed Article 5 and stated basically that the United States is supporting Article 5. I don't believe, that President Trump is going to throw Europe under the bus if Russia attacks Article 5 for real. But here is a caveat. The problem is that Putin is not going to roll on tanks and jets to any of those countries. All he has to do is to continue with his hybrid war and sabotage activities, and to make sure that the West does not respond. And that's precisely why it's urgent for NATO to reconsider its hybrid warfare strategy and to reconsider Article 5, actually what it means. And also here in Washington, D.C., we have to understand that we are also going to be affected by that, and that our national security strategy also has to count for a new generation of warfare, the one that Russia and China are happily waging against the West.
Lastly, I want to ask about the viability of a peace plan that's accepted by both Ukraine and Russia. I mean, do you see a world where President Zelenskyy signs off on a peace plan and Vladimir Putin signs off on that same plan?
I can really not tell you with certainty what is going to happen, but if history is any indication, Putin is more than happy to sign whatever he wants. The problem is whether he is going to follow through on such a thing. We already saw like a Budapest memorandum. We already saw multiple peace agreements in the past, and we already know that the Kremlin violated, because what Putin needs to do right now is to buy more time to replenish his military and reposition. Words are cheap. Actions speak louder than words. And that's precisely why the West right now needs to make sure that Ukraine is armed with everything that Ukraine needs to put Russia on the defensive in case Russia again attacks. That's the only language that Putin will understand. Papers and empty agreements and words will not make the deal.
Ivana Stradna, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Thank you, as always, for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.